My name's Douglas Hernley and I run a business called Carry Payments.
My name is Hema Vallabh and I am founding partner of 535 Ventures.
I'm Junaid Duplessis. I am the managing partner of Launch Africa Ventures.
My name is Mike Moppy. I'm founder and general partner at Enza Capital.
I'm Nadia Musaji. I'm the co-founder at WIM Hub.
I'm Zachariah George. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of Launch Africa Ventures.
I've been very fortunate in my business not to have ever had to raise funding, and that's part of the journey. I'm a big believer in sales and in generating sales. It doesn't matter how difficult the market is, we look for the optimistic and we look for opportunity and we attack it as hard as possible. And what we've learned is when things are the hardest, it's in fact where there's most opportunity. And I often say to my teams, when sales is easy if you do it hard, but really hard if you do it easy.
Don't just think of innovations, the newest, sexiest thing. What is the problem you're solving, right? If you're solving a problem, if you're seeing to somebody's pain point, if you are making someone's life easier, that's what people will part with capital for.
I always think people is your biggest asset. So during good times and during difficult times, look after your people, especially your talent. Make sure that you look after them. This is the time, in the absence of dry powder, that you maybe offer them more equity in the business that will lock them in for the long term.
For me, when there's an economic downturn, I think about one thing. I think cash is queen. And I always say cash is queen and not king, because when you give women money, I don't know if our money does yoga or Pilates, but it just stretches much further. And I think entrepreneurs need to think about revenue.
I think it's very important for founders to be aware of the importance of cash flow management, managing their runway, making sure that they are minimizing the cost of acquiring customers. It's very important for founders to know how to run on an empty tank, by not necessarily cutting costs, but by figuring out what are the right incentives for their employees, for their stakeholders, for their clients and their partners to maximize output without affecting their bottom line.
When things get tough, people often pull back. They don't want to spend, they don't want to attack opportunity, and it's exactly the wrong mindset. When things get hard, it's exactly when to provide funding, when to create liquidity and let people take those challenges and move on. Warren Buffett says it well, when the tide goes out, we see whose pants are still on, and I always intend that our business, we keep our pants on when the tide's out.
It's like in the desert, we're in Africa and safari, right? When the water is scarce, everybody goes to the same water hole, and that's when things get depleted quicker. Find different watering holes. You know, you maybe have to look a little bit further, you have to look where you haven't looked before. And the second one is almost the converse of that, right? So how are you that different pond for your customer? So if everybody is solving a certain problem, what are you doing that's different?
We made sure that our systems and processes are efficient, so we spend more time focusing now on operational efficiency during this time. Focus on your investors. Communicate, communicate, communicate. This is not the time that your investors should be worried about what's happening in the business. Always be proactive in your communication. And I would say that ecosystems, collaborations is probably what is going to take you through these difficult times.
I think that for entrepreneurs and investors alike, we need to remain focused on the fundamentals. We need to think about building long-term sustainable businesses, and we need to be patient, and we need to know that Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither will the African venture and technology ecosystem.
Consolidate your cash reserves and make sure that you cut out all the fat that is unnecessary within your business. Keep it lean. The second is make smart and strategic investments, right? Because in a downturn, everybody can actually negotiate much better, right? So look for the good deals now, because sometimes spending a little now is going to help you in the long term, right? So be really smart about how you are spending the money. And the third thing is go out there and sell like hell.
I think it's important to understand that downturns happen. It is part and parcel of normal economic cycles, and it's important for people to not panic and not act and have knee-jerk reactions to events that are completely normal. A crisis is often a great time to introspect and look at your business, look at your employees, figure out what really motivates people to do what they do.
We are always raising debt. Part of our business is is a credit business, so it constantly requires more capital to lend out. And even in tougher environments, it is harder to raise capital for sure, and it's certainly more difficult to raise debt. But if your business is sound and the fundamentals of your business is sound, that's always a possibility, and there are always people who will provide the funding. You just need to look a little wider and look a little harder.
VC capital is not for everybody. On a good day, during a downturn, during tough times, more so. Always aim to get to revenue, self-generated funding, if possible. And the good news is the landscape, in the context of Africa, with a lot more attention, there's a lot of alternative funding that's quite new in the industry, but it comes down to then working with partners who understand, whether it's incubators, accelerators, but when you don't know what to do, start with what you know and build that up to whatever comes next.
I think that we should always remember that equity is the most expensive funding solution for any business. And so I've been a real fan of revenue-based financing. Revenue-based financing is for companies that have demonstrated revenue in their business, and they approach financiers to give them a loan which is repayable by taking a small amount of percentage of their revenue monthly and repaying it over a longer period of time. So revenue-based financing, short-term loans, and any other working capital facility should now be part of the mix, not only equity, as we saw before the downturn.
I think one of the most compelling sources of funding for a business is revenue. And startups and businesses should focus as much as they can on generating revenue from the core business operations.
So I think that entrepreneurs need to think more broadly, not just VC, because a lot of the time, sometimes your business doesn't need venture capital. It needs trade finance, it needs working capital, it needs debt finance.
Venture capital is not for everyone. I would go out on a limb and say less than 0.5%, maybe even less than 0.1% of businesses that seek venture capital funding deserve venture capital funding. Founders have to be very careful about and almost explain and understand themselves before approaching VCs as to why they need that extremely risky funding. Until you get to positive unit economics, as much as possible try and bootstrap. To raise, use your own capital versus having to use external capital. Getting to cash flow break even is not an expectation at all, but getting to positive unit economics where your margins, your gross margins and your operating margins get better every quarter is super important, and you don't have to raise venture capital to get there.
I've been building my businesses for over a decade now, and we've gone through many ups and downs and significant challenges over that period. And during it, I often used to get myself completely stressed out and nervous and couldn't see how we were going to get through the next week or the next month. But I started to learn that I would always get to the other end of that. And in fact, when we were in perhaps some of the darkest times, that's when we learned the most about what we were doing, or learned the most about ourselves. And what I eventually realized is whether it's an up cycle, whether it's a down cycle, whether business is hard or whether business is easy, it's all about the journey for me. We're creators and the journey is the destination.
In these times, there's, I think, a couple of things that I think around. One is don't let perfection hinder progress. You need to, in your own, with your team, with your leadership, to understand what is good enough. In an environment around tech innovation, especially first to market's important. I'm not saying be sloppy and just throw something into the market, but there's a fine line between waiting too long to release a perfect product versus, just throwing something out there and you fail and then it's all over.
I think during any economic downturn or any challenging period is also a period to focus on opportunities. And so I think for founders, revisit your strategy, revisit your supply relationships, revisit your investor relationships. Any thriving business during a good time or a bad time have very good business fundamentals. So revisit those business fundamentals. Make sure that you have the right revenues coming into your business, that you diversify your revenue line, not being dependent on only one customer or one revenue stream, and then while at the same time control your costs.
And when you start to actually look at that framework and goes, what is costing me money, what is making me money, what is sinking my money, right? You start to then make strategic decisions based on that, right? And that's like almost step one, right? Step two is then going, right, from here on, how do I build for success? What's really important for me, for my vision, for my business? Sometimes you can't be tied to the love of your product. You've got to be tied to actually what people are going to pay for.
The vast majority of founders that we've dealt with over the last 10 years just are thoroughly underprepared. So I would say before you start a technology company, not just in this market, but in any market, is to spend months, if not years, understanding the lay of the land, understanding what your unique selling proposition is. It could be technology, it could be IP, it could be intrinsic knowledge of a market, but thorough preparation before you jump in, and being aware that it may take you years before you get it right, and have enough dry powder to weather the first few months or first couple of years of your venture.
I think a strong support structure as an entrepreneur is very important, both in personal and business perspective. So I have very close mentors, an extremely supportive family, but in the end of the day, it does come to self-belief and self-actualization. And if you're able to reflect inward and realize that you can conquer big challenges, in fact, the bigger the challenge, the more exciting it is.
Something I've realized is the value of sleep. I can do with missing meals, I can do with, doing long haul flights and, being all over the world and pushing hard, strategizing, going deep. But the value of sleep for me is one of my things that I protect fiercely. My co-founder and I, we have this enough day chat where we're not even there to answer each other's questions, but we just spar ideas because it's getting it out of your system. And I find that's what helps me sleep well. And by getting the sleep that I need, it's able to hone in your focus.
I go for a walk every single day just to clear my head without my cell phone, even if it's just around the block where I live in Cape Town. It's a sense of I'm doing something for me. And I try to also not spend an hour with my phone or my computer in the evening. Again, I cook a meal or I go meet a friend.
It's really important for you to find a tribe. I found my tribe. We are 3 incredible women leaders who have shared backgrounds, and we're there for each other no matter what. We can have incredible conversations without having to put on the show that we've got it all together. Then, I'm a family-orientated person, so actually just spending time with my children. So every time I go off and it's taxing and I come back home and there's these 2 people that unconditionally love me, no matter what, and they have absolutely no expectation of me other than to love them back. And I think that's really beautiful, and that really energizes me.
I think it is super important for human beings, especially working as founders of startups or working in funds like us, to have a parallel passion that they have outside of their work. Most founders and people that work in this industry use their left side of their brain a lot. It's very analytical. So you have to counterbalance it by a creative side of your brain. And then challenge yourself physically. It doesn't have to be sprinting or swimming. It could just be, hiking. It could be doing something that pushes your body so that you stay physically fit. I'd encourage people to read books, read fiction, right? Why fiction? Because fiction allows you to stretch the boundaries of your reasoning above the real world. If you look at books like 1984 or Brave New World, a lot of it was written in the 1930s and 40s, and a lot of what they said would happen did happen decades later. So read books of fiction, challenge your mind, and balance that with challenging your body and challenging your creativity.
Servant leadership is important to me because it's a component of being human. I expect a lot of people to work really hard in my businesses, and if I'm not willing to work alongside them and invest everything I have in their development too, then we're not going to come to an adequate outcome. So I strongly believe that a success should be a success of the team and should be a success of all of us, both in our personal and our business capacities, and servant leadership is a key way to enabling that.
I always think around service being not just in the moment, the here and now, which is very true, but how does that service become something that lives beyond you? If you think around capital, people for some reason don't associate this thing called profit and capital in commercials with service and purpose and impact. And for me, those don't live in separate houses. And I think my personal purpose and my service through my work has been building vehicles and organizations, platforms which enable others to do this more easily.
Personally, I've always subscribed to the same leadership style as Gandhi and Mother Teresa, which is allow your people to have the power to make decisions, and you are just the guide, guiding them into the right direction. And so for me, servant leadership is being able to serve your staff, your family, your community, and through that practice being able to show and demonstrate leadership.
Servant leadership is putting the needs of the vision, of your values, of the greater good ahead of your own. And when I think about my organization and I think about the organizations that I'm part of and my companies, it's around how do I serve others? How do I grow this bigger and better? Because if I get this right, I'm able to help so many more people.
You may never see the fruits of those seeds that you sow immediately. You may see them immediately, you may see them in months or years. But if you do that, if you give of yourself and your time, your skills, sometimes your money, and in kind, but you give selflessly as service or servant leadership driven, and the energy behind it is good and not malicious or ulterior, I can guarantee you that you will get tenfold over. And I think that it also bodes well into the spirit of Ubuntu that South Africa embodies and a lot of the rich cultures and traditions we see in Africa. So that's what I make of servant leadership.
Surrounding yourself with positive, energetic, and entrepreneurial people makes a huge difference when tackling challenges or problems in one's own business. And the people involved in the Harambean organization are exactly that. They represent the values of not just entrepreneurship, but entrepreneurship in Africa, which I think is one step bigger than a typical entrepreneur elsewhere in the world.
I think what the Alliance has done is, again, given us a space where people actually see you. They know the slog, the toil, the turmoil that happens behind the scenes that no one else does. And it almost makes you feel normal again in a world that otherwise says you're crazy.
I think that the value that the Harambean network bring to myself, but to so many Harambeans in the network, is the thing called network. A lot of time, and especially in Africa, we are not born into those networks. We are really the first generation opening up and building the networks for the next generation to come. I think there's also a sense of deep values in the Harambe network, and the discipline to practice those values is the same discipline that we'd want to see our founders and the Harambeans run their own businesses. And I certainly enjoy aspects of how disciplined the Harambe is in the formation and the practice of being a Harambean.
So I always think about how incredible the Alliance has been for me, and also how much you get out of the Alliance is how much you put in, right? And so for me, if I think about our biggest clients, it has come through partnerships within the Alliance. And for me, it's about how is it that we give and take within the network, but not around expectations of giving and taking, that we give from a place of generosity, that there's no expectation of return.
Being a Harambean to me means I'm part of an alliance that that places others first before oneself. The things that you do for yourself are gone when you're gone. The things that you do for others last significantly longer than just your lifespan. It's what often is called legacy thinking. And if you look at some of the greatest things that have ever been developed in this world, it's people that thought above and beyond themselves, right? And that's what being a Harambean is, and that's why I like it.